Good afternoon, I think. My body's still not sure what language it's in besides how we speak. I really am very, very excited. I want to thank a lot of people for making this collaboration between really the country of the US, the State Department, and the National Park Service. With your ministry, looking at what I believe and I have spent my career in, which is looking at national parks and their value to where we are and to where we go as a country and a nation. And so today I'm going to speak a little bit about where we are. If that's okay with y'all, if I can make this work, we got to make it. Let's try that one. Let's try that one. Okie dokie. Okay, what button am I not pushing? Okay, that's delightful. In the meantime, I'll fake it while she's doing something. I didn't even see that one. I was over here working on the computer. Cool. Again, welcome and thank you very much for your time this morning. But more importantly, let's talk about what y'all are excited about. The last few days, I have learned the differences between your national parks and our national parks. Many people will say in the United States and around the world that this arrowhead that I'm wearing, which I'm very proud of, is the symbol for the national parks. And the national parks were and are the greatest gift that we give the world. The United States was the first to understand the value of national parks on a major scale. And we have grown, changed, and diversified over the years as we've learned more about why we protect areas, not just the natural areas, but also the historic areas, and how they make us special. In the United States, right now, we have 419 different park sites. When your delegation came to the United States and we met in DC, we were tickled, I was tickled in particular, because they were amazed at the amount of titles we have for our national parks. We actually have 24 different designations, and those designations can be historic site, Civil War battlefield, national military battlefield, national park, national river, which I'm proud of because I manage 3, and many others, national seashores. All of those designations mean the same thing for us. They're all managed the same way. Some may have a little more specifics that we pay real attention to, but as a whole, in the service, and we are one service. Took us 40 years to get there, though. Let me tell you a little bit about that. When we first started saving land in the United States, it really was because we were moving west. We're a huge country. And the Western migration was going. We had many, many wealthy folks building railroads, starting hotels out west, trying to get people to move out west. And it was some of those folks that understand the true importance of decision making. They decided and went to the president and said, I sat outside in Yellowstone, actually. I sat outside and had a lunch. And while I was doing that, I realized that this land is so precious that I should own it. That it really belongs to future generations. That's how Park Service started in our country. And they went back and told everybody. So the first 40 sites were all huge processes and ecosystems out west. Crater Lake is the deepest lake in the United States. Grand Canyon, the most spectacular view. How many of you ever been to Grand Canyon? It's one of our biggest parks, and it gets millions of visitors a year because of that spectacular view. How many of you have been downtown and actually gone down into the canyon? Me too. Last time was on a mule, and I won't do it again. I had done it before walking. I was getting older. I thought I'd take the mule trip down. About halfway down, I kept looking down this 500 feet I could drop, and I thought, I think I trust my 2 legs better than this old mule I'm standing on. So, but in a remarkable resource. Other big land masses came along after that. Denali National Park. Denali is truly the highest point in North America, and it came in almost 60 years later. President Carter, when he was the president in the 70s, realized that Andrew Johnson, who had been a president 100 years earlier, had bought Alaska for less than $11 million. And it was called the Alaskan Folly. A lot of people laughed and joked. Now they realize it was probably the best $11 million the United States ever spent, because the resources in Alaska are remarkable. Carter realized that, and in his presidency, his 4 years, he passed what was then called, it still is, the Alaska Lands Bill. And that would turn over 65% of the land in the area of Alaska, the state of Alaska, to the taxpayers and to the next generation. We also learned over time that we needed to merge our decision was to merge our natural sites and our historic sites, because we truly are kind of a young country. And we have lots of land, but we also have very unique histories. We also realized it's not just our history we should be taking care of. Our archaeological sites became extremely important to us, partly because we are so young, and partly because we didn't know enough. And the best example, and the first example of a true archaeological site that was added to the National Park Service was Mesa Verde. Mesa Verde is truly a remarkable archaeological resource. It tells the story of Pueblo Indians over 6,000 years ago. And I have had the opportunity to sit in one of the kivas and watch the sun go down. And it is truly a spiritual place. And so for our Native Americans and everyone else that was indigenous to the United States before Europeans came in, this place holds sacred value. And then we also realized, as a nation of immigrants, which is what we are in the United States, that we really probably got to think about those other sites. Not necessarily the happy ones all the time, but the sad ones too. And so we started adding sites. One that was the most important, and probably every American touches and feels a special bond to, is the Statue of Liberty. Most of our forefathers somewhere passed that en route coming into the United States. And so it, like your assembly or parliament that I went to day before yesterday, holds a personal tie to how important Iceland is and the development and creation of Iceland. That's how a lot of us feel about the Statue of Liberty and all the sites in Washington. The Washington Monument, the statue, the White House for that matter. But the Statue of Liberty has a special place for most Americans. In our parks, we believe wholeheartedly our responsibility is to tell the whole story of how America came about. And we do share some of the sad stories now. We've added in Alcatraz, which is a pretty nasty prison for many years. It gets thousands, millions of visitors now. We've added in Nánar, which is actually the saddest story, one of our saddest stories in American history, which talks about where we put Japanese citizens when we were in war. And so we've realized that the civil rights movement, human rights movements are important to our history, and we're starting to save more and more of those sites. But those tell our history and make us who we are as Americans. The official purpose, and every park ranger in the United States, and we have many of different types, but every one of them learns this, hopefully, in their very first lesson in training, and that is to preserve the scenery, the natural and historic objects, and the wildlife within, to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such a manner and by such a means as we will leave them unimpaired for future generations. I will tell you from experience, this is a double-edged sword. Because true protectionism also comes true understanding. And so what our conservators and our rangers do is three major different functions. Conservation, which is the resource management side. We do all kinds of studies. We study rivers and water quality and fish and biotics and plant diversity and you name it. Any kind of special feature there is, we have folks that do that. The night sky. And then we have visitor protection. And those are the rangers, which is hard to believe they let me carry a gun. But for 20 years of my career, they let me carry a gun. That wasn't really necessarily smart, but I was a successful ranger anyway. And our law enforcement protection have very inclusive law enforcement responsibilities. We truthfully are as powerful as marshals or any other federal law enforcement. So it's hard to believe I made arrests years ago. Not many, by the way. Most visitors, like your visitors, I would say 99.99% follow rules when they know the rules and understand them. There's 1% that doesn't matter what you do, they're going to do whatever they want to do. And then our third group is probably the most fun to work with and sometimes the most engaged, which is our education and interpretation. Those rangers work with kids from kindergartners all the way up to college students, and really their job, if it's at working a front desk like some of your folks that I met, or some out on the backcountry learning to talk to individuals and help them understand why they shouldn't do what they're doing or help them understand why what they're doing is correct and good for the environment, are the ones that sometimes may have the toughest jobs. But we see in the Park Service, even in my park, and I manage 3, but in our parks last year, we had over 25,000 students that we would do school programs for at different age groups. They're doing our research, they're doing our education themselves, they help with volunteer projects. And we do this because we understand and believe wholeheartedly that the next generation are our leaders, and this is our legacy to them. The providing enjoyment on the second side of every equation is one that sometimes gets varied and gets confused. But I think we've learned in the Park Service is people don't understand or don't get to play in a park or understand its true value. It then therefore has very little value to them. And all of us know that finances in the world are not easy to come by anymore. And so we've learned that helping provide for enjoyment is just as important as a protection, as long as the protection comes first. And that means learning to help them have a good time in your parks, but managing them so that they have a good time and do less damage. Because we've learned in our parks that sometimes if we don't help manage them, they do damage even when they don't know. And I feel sure that's probably very true in Iceland too. And our recreation values have everything. My particular park, one is a recreation area, is what it's titled. And we have rock climbing, boating, hiking, camping, fishing, hunting. There's not a whole lot we don't allow them to do as long as they do it the right way. There are a few things. They can't pick flowers and they can't take stuff away and they can't damage our ecosystems. But other than that, as far as recreational activities, if we can do it safely and fairly, we try to let them do that. But in recreation, the 3 things that we see in enjoyment, on the enjoyment side of our mission, really are the recreation, getting to play. 2 is solitude. And this is one sometimes we forget. Truthfully, over the years that I've managed parks and been in parks, I know sometimes I want to play. I used to be a climber. I would like to climb and spend time on the rock. Sometimes I just wanted to go sit by the river. Not hear anybody else, not see anybody else, and enjoy nature for nature. And I think we have a large percentage of visitors that want just that. And I think we have to make sure that we don't plan that out when we're planning parks. Because sometimes that's the soulness, which also turns to the inspiration. And I think inspiration is where we should all be when we're looking at nature and preserving it. In the national parks, and they've been referred to a few times today, we have some tools that we use to help manage national parks. Some of our parks, I'll pick on Yosemite, because some of you went to Yosemite, so I can pick on Yosemite. Yosemite is one of our large 10 parks in the country. They get millions of visitors. The other is the mall that all of you went to, and the mall averages 10 million visitors a day. That's a lot of folks, no matter how you do it, during a season. Because they go to different sites, so they're counted as, if you go to Lincoln Memorial and Washington Monument, you get counted. That's why it seems high, but it is high, according to their statistics. The other thing that I found fascinating about Yosemite was because it is so large and gets so many visitors a year, it's done a couple things. It's realized it has different types of visitors. It has the ones that are going to be there for 2 hours and then have to get back on the bus and go somewhere else. Do y'all have that in yours? I watched that when I was here. They also have those that are coming and going to stay. They're going to stay for 4 or 5 days. Then you have some that are only spend one night. So what all can I do in one day? And they expect the ranger to be able to tell them especially how to spend their one day. But all of those use parks differently. The ones that are going to stay 3 or 4 days, they may go out on a long backcountry trail. They may spend a night spending the night in a campground. They may hike 10 miles. Now this is where I can pick on Americans. We don't walk maybe as much as y'all do as a culture. Just trying to be diplomatic here, but we probably don't. And so, a 10-mile hike for us is probably a 20-mile hike for y'all. But we've had to learn how to figure out how to space that around parks so that everybody has a good experience, because that's what you remember. We use tools, and one of the tools that we use a lot of is figuring out how to kind of separate that out. One is we use fees, entrance and recreation fees. We have concession fees, which are for hotels, lodging, restaurants. We figured out as the government we weren't very good at those. In the beginning we thought we could do it. We're not very good at it. We don't do that well. And we figured that out. So a lot of businesses said, we do this for a living. We're really good at it. And we finally wised up and realized they were much better at it than we are. And so now we do concessions for almost all of our lodging, not camping, but lodging fees, some of our activities, interpretive activities. We also use a tool that I don't think y'all have yet, or I don't know if y'all use, which are called commercial and special use permitting. And those are for specific activities. They give us the ability across the service to make it fair, make it safe, whatever the activity is, and to ensure that we're getting the best quality as well as the best experience for our visitor. So if you have a company that's not doing it right, not following all the rules and recommendations that we have, you can pull that and say, when you get your act together and you decide to play to make it safe, your equipment's the best, you follow the right rules, and you make sure your visitor's experience is the best, then you can have a permit back. And we found that very, very beneficial for us. The other thing is we also have donations. We have some tremendous partners that truly love our parks. We've been around over 100 years. The Park Service, 102 as of last year. Parks, 103, almost 145. And many different philanthropy groups, many different groups outside of the government love their national parks. And they donate us money, and so do our locals. Quite often it's not the big businesses. Quite often it's the visitor that lives there and goes for a hike and wants to say, okay, I'd like that hike, make sure it's maintained next year. Here's $1 or here's $5, can you put that towards that trail? And that's made a huge difference because parks are expensive to do them well. The other partnerships that a lot of times don't get a lot of credit in national parks are really our other partners that are vitally important to see if we're successful. That is our city governments, and I guess for y'all that would be municipalities. Because we have cities within my park. I have 5 cities, 2 in one and 3 in another, that are within my park boundary. I work with the city managers daily. Our park neighbors which are the people that live right outside that piece of line that's drawn in the sand that says this park is park and this park's not. Our landowners, our partners, those businesses that are not within our boundaries affect the experience of every visitor. And we, in part, impact every one of those neighbors. So we learned, not at the beginning of the Park Service and the National Park Service in the United States. We didn't learn this lesson until we were in it about 50 years, that parks don't stand alone. That for parks to truly be effective and to really preserve areas, it's a partnership. And since then, we have become much better at it. My job as a manager, I spend much more time with my city managers, county managers, tourism people of all levels, universities, all of those, and my neighbors are my stakeholders. That's who I spend my time with. That's who my staff spends a lot of their time with, to ensure we're meeting both needs. Fee collection is an interesting story because in the Park Service, only half of our parks collect fees, half do not. Our big parks do. They have recreation fees, they have entrance fees. 203 parks collect no fees. They're small historic sites, usually, or smaller sites. And the cost of collecting that fee would be pretty astronomical. For us, we make it very expensive to collect fees in parks. We have all kinds of priorities and processes in place, and so it becomes very expensive. But in 16, and this just shows you what we collected 16, 17, and 18, just in volcanoes, Lassen volcanoes. The ones that really collect the most fees are some of our larger parks. Except for, has anybody been to the Great Smokies? Great Smoky Mountains National Park? Me, too. I like the Smokies. You used to work right next to them. I'm really fond of them. And they're one of our largest parks on the east, and one of the most revered. It has the most diversity of plants of anybody besides my park, so we fight back and forth. But they don't collect fees. In their enabling legislation, which is the law that establishes every single park, and everyone is different of our 418, they determine if you can or cannot collect fees, and to what type. And it also determines what your significance is. Why are we going to set this land aside and make you special? Why are we going to preserve it at a different level? And it's that enabling legislation that for the Grand Smokies has saved them a lot of money over time, because it said you can't, any fee collected for the Smokies stays only in the Smokies. It doesn't get shared to the other parks. All the other parks that collect fees donate 20%. They get to keep 80%. Yosemite collects $100 million a year. They get to keep 80% of that, and the other $20 million a year goes back to other parks that don't collect fees. So they help try to pay for the other parks that for whatever reason they can't collect fees. It may be how they're situated on the landscape, because if you have 20 zillion ways to get in a park, it's really hard to collect fees. If you have, like Yosemite, 4 ways in, 4 ways out, it's pretty easy. My park will never collect fees. We'll never have entrance fees. I have a major interstate that goes right through my park. We're not ever collecting fees, at least not that way. So I get some of Yosemite's money every year, and I think that's lovely. I'm not sure Yosemite does, but I like it. Concession fees have always been the hardest one, and in concession fees, we do the same thing. For the parks that have fees, that 80% gets to stay to that park, and then 20% is donated to all of our other smaller parks that don't collect fees. That's a chunk of change over time. Special uses and special use permits, we use a lot, and we talked about them a little bit before, but I highlighted this one in particular because every once in a while, we allow things that I never thought we'd allow in a national park. They were there when they were started, and they're part of somebody else's big plan. And the one picture on, I guess it's your right, is in my park, one day a year. The only place in the United States of America can legally base jump is Bridge Day. We have base jumpers that literally come from around the world to jump that one day a year. And it is an adventure. We have 100,000 people a year or more that come to watch base jumping that day. And it is extremely managed. Let's put it that way. We have security boats on the water. We have railroads not working that day. They take the day off. Getting major railroads to stop for a day is pretty hard to do. They take a break from the permit from 9 to 3 so they don't hit anybody that may land on the railroad track. I've learned that base jumpers may be very good, but Mother Nature is very unique, and if she decides to blow while they're jumping, they go wherever we don't want them to go. We always have a few in trees. So we use this every year. It never fails. But because of that, we have a special use permit for that one. And if the weather really gets horrible, I pull that permit, and we've done that before. Not a pleasant thing to do, but the right thing to do, because people were gonna probably die. So we do use special use permits that way. We also use them for a lot of our interpretive groups, like climbing was on there. We don't teach climbing as a general rule in the national parks, but we have a lot of climbers. And most of those, if they're not individual climbers, they will come in through a group, through a commercial use permit. So we will give a climbing instructor a permit to allow them to do that. As I said, concessions have always been an issue in parks. Those two that I'm giving a picture of right now are two of the most, one's a 5-star hotel. It's been there forever. It continues, and every time something happens, we build it there again. Geyser Grill, we know better. If it ever burns to the ground this time, we won't build it there next time. That's one of the lessons we all learn. Sometimes it is great to put a new facility into your resource. Sometimes it's better to have it to the outside. And we've learned more about that in the last 150 years. These are just a little lift of different activities that we do. I was laughing about the mule trip because I'm not ever doing. Y'all can do a mule trip. And give me your opinion after you do it. It's really quite exciting. We have guided backpacking trips. We have guided about everything. Almost what I have found, what y'all have. So that is really important because they're very similar activities that people like to do in different parts of the world. Y'all are just a little more extreme on some issues. When I stood out on the ocean yesterday, I thought, ooh. But it was exhilarating, and it was truly beautiful. We've also learned to manage people, and I think this is something that y'all are working towards, is learning to manage massive amounts of people in a short amount of time that are now coming to Iceland. It really does make a difference on how and what you build and what facilities and where you put them. You have the control of this. It's just got to be planned and done because you're a little behind, I think, because I don't think you realized how massive it was going to change. And it's changed so quickly that I think you're in the planning phase. I don't think you can stay in the planning phase too long. It's harder to fix something if you wait too late. And visitors are like, they're wonderful people, don't get me wrong, I'm a visitor, and I'm gonna do that this weekend. I'm gonna play visitor. But they do different things, and they see the world differently. So if the experience isn't fabulous the first time, you don't get them back the second time. And if you want visitation and tourism to be your number one business, then you need to make sure that they're getting that experience now. So I know y'all are working on that, and I give you credit for doing that because that's hard to do. It's hard to look at it and say, how do we step back and fix this and make sure we're all moving in the same place? But when you do, it's a wonderful experience. We use trams. We don't allow a lot of people to drive in Sharp Valley. We've done transportation studies. We have areas, Acadia, you don't drive your car in Acadia anymore during the summer. In the summer, you take a tram if you're going downtown. We do it in Joshua Tree. We do it in a few other places. some for the mass amounts of visitation, and some for the resource. Some places in the desert, if you have 20,000 cars, you've got a lot of smoke that doesn't go anywhere. And so we've forced them. And I don't know about y'all, but Americans are really bad. They like taking their cars, and they're really independent. And the idea of giving up their car is like, yeah. But they've learned, and they're adapting. And it's better for the environment. The other partners, our largest partner by far is the National Park Foundation. And just in 1 year, last year they awarded $41 million back to parks. We apply for grants from them. They raised over almost $150 million last year for national parks. And then we apply as parks for different special events or education in particular. They pay for almost all of our transportation to get students from inner cities, DC or Chicago or Philadelphia, out into nature. And we're finding out in America, because we are becoming much more urbanized, that a lot of people don't do that. I mean, they don't go out for hikes, and they don't know what the night sky looks like. All they've seen is light. They don't know what a bird sounds like in its natural habitat. And we feel very strongly that if we don't start re-educating and giving that experience back to the youth, in 20 years, they won't understand the value of where they fit in our natural scheme. So we're spending a lot of National Park Foundation money doing just that. And we also have volunteers, and we have thousands of volunteers. Just in my park last year, we had 30,000 volunteers doing different kinds of things throughout the whole year. Much of that, the expensive stuff, like retirees that want to do research, or curators that want to give back their skills a little bit for 2 weeks at a time, or teachers that want to teach for a couple weeks. All of those things we don't have to pay for. They volunteer their experience and their expertise, and it's been wonderful. Then the last that we make money with is our concessions. We're not allowed to make money as far as services. So we have a cooperating association across the country, and every park's a little different, but there are two major ones. And they sell all of our interpretive materials, like brochures and books, and now t-shirts, and coffee cups, but all of those things that people want to take from a visitor center to remind them of their trip or to learn more about that particular resource. Visitor spending near national park sites, and I just played with this morning because it came up in a conversation last night. We make a lot of money in parks, but right outside of parks, we make a lot of money, or it brings in a lot of money. So if you look at the categories, that's gas, kind of like what his study was looking at, but it's outside the boundary. Gas, transportation, food, spending, that kind of stuff. Last year was $18.2 billion. That's a chunk of change. Okay, is that better? Okay. Sorry about that, folks. And then the next is added to the national economy, which is our GNP. And in the GNP last year, which measures NPS contributions to the gross national product of the United States, it was $20.3 billion. My neck of the woods, truthfully, it is we are probably the third largest employer, either within tax-based money or the commercial side of the house, which is campgrounds and lodging and restaurants and gas stations and tourism and guides. So for us in our country, we've learned it's an important part of what we do. And I think in Iceland, you're at that point. You're learning how important it really can be. And also you have a chance to do it the right way. Learn from our lessons, and that was what part of our partnership is all about. We've done some things right. We've learned our lessons the hard way on some other aspects of growing national parks. But as your national parks here in the country grow, always remember the reason that they exist, that enabling legislation, which is the thing that makes it most significant. Because if you're authentic to that and you preserve the natural part of that, people will continue to come and the resource will be in whole. And truly, that is the gift that we all give to our future generations. So I appreciate your time this morning, and I thank you for what you're doing as you expand your national parks.